The handcuffs had barely clicked shut when the billionaire CEO realized the man she had just arrested was holding something that could destroy everything she had built. "Dad!" The little boy's scream echoed across the marble lobby. Daniel Reed stood perfectly still as two officers pulled his wrists behind his back. His 8-year-old son, Noah, clung to his coat, trembling. Across the lobby, Victoria Hale watched from behind a wall of glass. She had ordered the arrest, and she was certain she was right. "Take him away," she said quietly. Daniel looked at her, not with anger, but with disappointment. Then he noticed the envelope in Victoria's hand. His face changed. "That letter," he whispered. "You really never read it, did you?" Victoria froze. The elevator doors closed behind the officers, and for the first time that morning, the most powerful woman in the city felt afraid. 3 hours earlier, Daniel had been repairing a broken refrigeration unit in the basement of Hale Meridian Foods, one of the largest food distribution companies in America. He wasn't an employee. He owned a tiny repair company with 2 trucks, 3 workers, and enough debt to keep him awake most nights. His wife had died 4 years earlier, leaving Daniel to raise Noah alone. He wasn't perfect. He sometimes worked too much. Sometimes he forgot school events. Sometimes he sat in his truck after dropping Noah off and wondered if he was doing any of it right. But he always came home. That morning, he had promised Noah pancakes after school. It was a small promise. Daniel kept small promises because they were the only things in life he could still control. While repairing the refrigeration system, Daniel discovered something strange. A sealed valve had been deliberately altered. Someone had bypassed the company's safety system. He photographed it. Then he noticed a second problem. Several shipments of donated food were being redirected before reaching shelters. The paperwork carried executive authorization. Daniel didn't know who was responsible, so he reported it. That was his mistake. Not because reporting it was wrong, because the person who received his complaint was Victoria Hale herself. Victoria had built Hale Meridian after inheriting a struggling company from her father. She was brilliant, disciplined, and relentlessly ambitious. But lately, she had been under enormous pressure. Investors were threatening to pull out. A major government contract was under review, and someone inside the company had been leaking confidential information. When Daniel's report reached her desk, it looked like sabotage. Worse, security footage showed Daniel entering restricted areas. Then came the final piece of evidence. A file appeared on Victoria's computer containing confidential company documents. Daniel's repair company credentials had been used to access it. Victoria confronted him in the lobby. "You accessed our system." Daniel stared at her. "No, we have your credentials." Then someone stole them. Victoria's jaw tightened. She had spent 20 years learning that hesitation could cost millions. She made the decision she would later regret. "Call the police." Daniel didn't fight. He simply looked at Noah. "Stay with Mr. Lewis." Noah began crying. "Dad, you didn't do anything." Daniel swallowed hard. "I know." But Victoria heard something different in his voice. Not confidence. Fear. At the station, Daniel refused to sign a statement without an attorney. He had almost no money for one. His phone was taken. His repair business couldn't operate without him. And Noah sat alone in a borrowed office, clutching the little plastic dinosaur Daniel had given him after his first day of school. Then a detective entered. He placed a photograph on the table. It showed the altered refrigeration system. "We found your fingerprints on the valve," he said. Daniel stared at the picture. Of course they were there. He had repaired it. But something bothered him. "Zoom in." The detective did. Daniel pointed at the corner. "That's not my tool mark." The detective frowned. Daniel leaned closer. "Whoever changed that valve used a left-handed torque wrench." The detective looked at him. Daniel was right. His company used right-handed equipment exclusively. A tiny detail, almost meaningless, except it meant someone had staged the scene. Meanwhile, Victoria returned to her office. Her hands were shaking. She hated that. She had spent her entire life believing emotions were weaknesses that other people could exploit. Then her assistant entered. "Ms. Hale, there's a problem." A bank notification appeared on the screen. Then another. Then another. 3 major accounts had been frozen. Victoria stood. "What is this?" Her assistant looked pale. "The board received an emergency notice from federal regulators." "Why?" "They're investigating the charity shipments." Victoria's stomach dropped. She turned toward the window. The same shipments Daniel had reported. Her phone rang. It was her father, the retired founder of Hale Meridian. Victoria answered. His voice was unusually quiet. Did you arrest a man named Daniel Reed? Yes. Then release him. Victoria stared at the phone. Why? Her father took a breath. Because Daniel's wife once saved this company. Victoria's face went blank. For years earlier, Daniel's wife, Sarah, had worked as a nurse at a rural clinic. During a food poisoning outbreak, Hale Meridian had unknowingly distributed contaminated products. Sarah discovered the problem. She contacted the company. But before the recall could be completed, she became sick while caring for patients. She died days later. Daniel had never blamed the company. He had never demanded money. He had never even told Victoria what Sarah had done. Because Sarah had made him promise one thing. Don't turn our grief into somebody else's punishment. Victoria sat down. The billionaire CEO suddenly understood why Daniel had looked at her with disappointment instead of hatred. He knew what she had forgotten. Human beings were behind every number on her spreadsheets. Victoria rushed back to the station. Daniel was still there. She entered the interview room alone. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then she placed her phone on the table. I was wrong. Daniel looked at her. That doesn't fix it. No. Her voice cracked. It doesn't. She expected anger. Instead, Daniel asked one question. Where's my son? Victoria lowered her eyes. With your neighbor. Daniel closed his eyes in relief. Then Victoria revealed the final truth. The stolen credentials weren't used to frame Daniel. They were used by a senior executive who had been secretly diverting food shipments and covering safety violations. But there was more. That executive had manipulated Victoria's own internal reports. He had used her ambition against her. The board was preparing to remove Victoria and dissolve the company. Her empire wasn't collapsing because Daniel had exposed her. It was collapsing because she had built a culture where people were too afraid to tell her the truth. Daniel was released. Victoria personally drove him home. Noah ran from the porch and wrapped his arms around his father. Daniel held him tightly. Victoria stayed beside the car. She could have walked away. Instead, she handed Daniel an envelope. Inside was a legal letter clearing his name and covering every cost caused by the arrest. Daniel looked at it. You don't owe me this. I know. He closed the envelope. Then why? Victoria looked toward Noah. Because I want to become someone who doesn't need to be forced to listen. Daniel nodded. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a beginning. Months later, Victoria resigned as CEO. The company survived under new leadership. Daniel never became rich. He kept repairing machines. He still missed the occasional school event. He still worried about bills. But every Friday afternoon, he picked Noah up early and took him for pancakes. And sometimes, when they passed the Hale Meridian building, Noah would look up at the towering glass windows. Is that the place that arrested Dad? Daniel smiled. Yeah. Do you hate them? Daniel thought for a moment. No. Why? He looked at his son. Because sometimes people don't need punishment. He squeezed Noah's hand. They need the courage to finally see what they've done. And inside that answer was the truth Victoria had spent a lifetime learning too late. An empire can survive losing money, power, and even its name, but the moment people become numbers, it has already begun to collapse.